All right. Thanking God once again, this time for, among other things, allegories. Because we want to call, first of all, this chapter less than Sodom. But it starts off with the first, 14 verses or so, given to us in the form of an allegory, which Merriam-Webster's dictionary, at least the online version, describes as, or defines as, the expression by means of symbolic fictional figures and actions of truths or generalizations about human existence. Or subdefinition 2 simply says a symbolic representation that God is going to make about Israel's history, or actually Judah's history up to this point, understanding that the northern 10 tribes Israel have already been taken off into Assyrian captivity. Nevertheless, he's going to start out by saying, make it known to them that their mother was a Hittite, their father an Amorite, two of the tribes that God said from the nations of Canaan, the land that you were settling, you're going to have to get rid of them because they are never going to be a healthy fit with you moving forward in integrity. And it's going to seem that at this point, this is just my paraphrase, God is telling them that in some way, the nations whose integrity they never cleansed from the land of Canaan have now in some way seemingly become their mother and father, or the mother and father of what they have become as a nation now in Judah, that God himself is about to cleanse from the land. Either way, he is going on to talk about in their history the way that he saved them, the way that they grew and became beautiful, even though they started out likened as a child that was defenseless and without clothing in a wild and unforgiving land. He's going to say later on that after they came to the appropriate age, he actually took them on as a spouse. Beyond that, he spoiled them to the point where they became royalty on an international or world stage. Understanding that in the days of Solomon, as we've said before, they became recognized as the greatest nation on earth. However, moving on in verses 15 through 22, he's going to talk about the way that they became proud and trusted in their beauty as opposed to, my ad lib, their integrity. Going on in verses 23 through 29 to say that their beauty actually became an abomination. And they became, in some ways, not satisfied with the attention and affection they received as a wife, and they turned into, flat out the word is going to call it, at least the ESV, a whore. Whoring with specific nations he's going to mention, among others, the Assyrians, the Chaldeans, and the Egyptians. Going even further to say that in their quest for attention or whatever it was they were seeking, they weren't just like any other adulterous wife. They weren't just like any other prostitute. They were unique in the way that, as we recently mentioned, they seemed so thirsty for attention, they actually paid their Johns to come take advantage of them. Understanding that ordinarily a prostitute gets paid for her services, they were, as we mentioned, so thirsty that they just wanted people to come in pretty much, even if they had to pay to get the attention, helping us to understand that the old saying, there is no such thing as bad publicity, it's not just flat out true. Because the attention they get is actually going to turn on them, as God is going to turn their newfound friends or those Johns against them. Verses 35 through 43 going on to talk about the way that God is assembling some of those very same nations they were paying to come in and receive services. They're going to turn those nations against them because they, over time, lost the respect for people who found basically no bottom to their integrity or no discernible limits to what they will or won't do. And so as God is turning the nations against them, he is going to describe the degree to which they have fallen in verses 44 through 52, likening them even further to their sisters. Samaria in the north, the northern 10 tribes are the capital of the northern 10 tribes, as we said, who have already been taken off into captivity. But he's going to liken them to another sister, Sodom, of Sodom and Gomorrah fame, telling them that they have now become more disgusting than Sodom and Gomorrah, a nation who he famously wiped off the map, or two cities he famously wiped off the map. Saying, however, in verses 53 through 58, that he will restore their fortunes. Surprisingly enough, the way he plans to, or it seems he plans to, restore the fortunes of Samaria and even Sodom. Going on to say, beyond simply restoring their fortunes, understanding that there are nations he brings back only to watch them fail again. He says that in verses 59 through 63, the end of the chapter, that he is actually going to provide an atonement for all of their wrongs and their embarrassing indiscretions. Something that may point forward to the atoning sacrifice of the Christ in the new covenant. An atonement that both the people of Israel and New Testament believers will be wise not to confuse with a blank check, as the Apostle Peter in the second epistle, or the epistle called 2 Peter, round about verse 21 of chapter 2, will give this warning. For it would have been better for them never to have known the way of righteousness than after knowing it to turn back from the holy commandment delivered to them. What the true proverb says has happened to them. The dog returns to its own vomit, and the sow, after washing herself, returns to wallow in the mire. Peter reminds us, as one who walked with Christ, that his atonement is not a blank check to be taken lightly, but it gives you a new opportunity, one you want to take seriously. Why is that important? Because the people of Judah at this time are being warned by God that even though they once looked down on Sodom and used them as a byword, they are now less than Sodom, thus our title. Going through some of those verses to help make that clear. Chapter 16, toward the latter half of verse 46, going into verse 47, says, "And your younger sister, who lived to the south of you, is Sodom with her daughters. Not only did you walk in their ways and do according to their abominations, within a very little time, you were more corrupt than they in all your ways." Going on in verse 52 to say, "Bear your disgrace, you also, for you have intervened on behalf of your sisters because of your sins in which you acted more abominably than they. They are more in the right than you. So be ashamed, you also, and bear your disgrace, for you have made your sisters appear more righteous." Going on in verse 56, as we have already alluded to, "Was not your sister Sodom a byword in your mouth in the day of your pride, before your wickedness was uncovered? Now you have become an object of reproach for the daughters of Syria and all those around her, and for the daughters of the Philistine, those all around who despise you. You bear the penalty for your lewdness and your abominations, declares the Lord." A passage that, much like Christ's atoning sacrifice, reminds me of one of the warnings he issued in the Sermon on the Mount when, toward the end of the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, he is going to say, "Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Around here, we've had running on heavy rotation a graphic that emphasizes that word falsely, understanding the way in which, in chapter 16 of Ezekiel, the criticism that Israel is now facing for being less than Sodom isn't false, reminding me that even today, far too much of the church has earned a reputation for embracing a level of integrity that's less than the Sodomites they once condemned and criticized. A reputation for lacking integrity that has flat out been earned because far too often it's just flat out true.